Hello, 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 and welcome once again to the Loudcast with me, your host, Kevin McLean. I am here in my flat in Leith, ready to chat about all things spoken word, and we have an incredible guest to chat all that with in the director of StAnza, Eleanor Livingston. I am very excited to be chatting to her, not only about her work in StAnza, but also her work as a poet. But to get in the mood, as always, we're going to have 3 poems for you to kick off the show, and I've tried to kind of theme them around the idea of StAnza. I've done my best. So we're going to kick off with, if StAnza is Scotland's International Poetry Festival, then I'm going to kick it off with one of my very favourite Scottish words. So this is Katie Ailes with Out With.
Out with. Preposition meaning outside, beyond. A term unique to Scotland. Revising my visa essay, applying for 3 more years here, I read my own scribbled words. Comparable opportunities for critical study do not exist out with Scotland. Out with, a term unfamiliar yet scrawled in my own hand, doubtlessly mine. And I wonder. I came here all rude American brass, all trash can, fanny pack. Where's the castle? Then Glasgow rolled itself under my tongue, a grey marble lulling my mouth open with O's, Glasgow, Kelvingrove, going to Tesco, then thistling my speech with sleekit lisps, wee packets of crisps, my lips like the lids of those glass bottles of sand I used to collect from every beach, my mouth the shore, holding each grain that had altered the flow of my speech, my pen flowing S, into the cursive waves of civilized, socialized, acclimatized, answering I, by accident. Then smiling. I may be from out, but I am now with.
And that was Katie Ailes with Out With. And yes, it did take an American to explain to me that out with is a purely Scottish word. I had no idea, but everyone that I meet learns that now. It is my favourite party anecdote. I am dull at parties, but we move right on, and normally we save our weekly sort of video, the one that comes out every Thursday, for the sort of final slot of this little section, but I've decided to mix things up a little bit, hoping that, it flows a little better. So we're going to get right to our weekly video now. It is a particular joyful and happy one, and I am so pleased to share it with you all. He is one of my favourite people, one of my favourite poets, an amazing writer and performer. This is Mark Galley with Pokemon Go.
We see it in the streets, and we read about it online, of groups of people fighting, divided. We try to hide it, to define the line of when to get involved and when to bide our time. Now, education is key. That's kind of my main theme. So for those that are confused, let me tell you what I mean about why Team Valor is the best of all the Pokemon Go teams. A little unexpected, but just hear me out. Those other teams don't stand a chance. See, we represent red. Like the first wild trainers, those red and blue guys couldn't be lamer. One was an extra, the other a loser rival. Thinking they're better, guys, you're in denial. Valor's got the passion, the flair, the strength, and the style. That's final. We'll leave others defending themselves as if they're on trial. It's a shame your bird's not a symbol for revival. We'll take all your gyms while you fight for survival. You'll call us aggressive. I prefer primal. So say what you want, that our nature's a bit rash, we move too fast, quick like the flash, a rapid dash to the gyms, and yeah, we have some flaws, but we want to be the best like no one ever was. Speaking of flaws, let's talk about instinct. The underdog of this Doug trio, there's not much I can say about them. They're a bit of a shell. They're the smallest team for those that couldn't tell. Maybe if they had a few more members, they'd be ringing the victory bell, but that's far-fetched. This isn't a game. It's a great race to the top minus the fortune and fame. So follow your instincts and rock climb Mount Silver, but it's gold I'll be seizing while you're left at the bottom, coughing and wheezing. Now on to Mystic. The blue-blooded majority, so cool and collective, yet so fucking boring. You'll leave me resting for days while you think up your strategy. Here's a quick one. How about attacking? But you won't touch me. You're too slow, bro. Stop all that thinking and Pokemon Go! I love this so much. But I should Pokestop the abuse and nuzlock the door, because in my confusion I forgot what I was here for, which was to spread education. pass down some trainer tips to a younger generation, so let me write you some advice. There's no need for battle. There's a bigger problem here for us to tackle. Different teams, but it's one fan base. Red, blue, or yellow, we all have our place in this whole new world we live in. From Paris to Japan, this magic carpet ride was given to us by a great man who turned trainers from fans like Abra, Kadabra, Alakazam. So calling all trainers, thank you for this gift. Let's do our best to not form a rift in this community we've made, because it's pretty damn great. So let's execute the stigma and eradicate the hate. Struggle our hardest to keep that fire lit, because I don't just love Pokemon. I diggle it. So the next time you lock eyes with a trainer, and I think there's a few, just show off your badges and say, "Oh, Mewtwo?"
That was Mark Galley with Pokemon Go, a truly pun-ridden poem. I can't do pun poems. Bex and Mark smash them out, and it makes me sad that I can't compete. But it's a beautiful piece. I really enjoy it, and Mark is an incredible performer. He knows how to engage with a crowd, how to give them space to be vocal, enjoy a piece, and this is a great example of it. The reason I put it in this spot rather than now is because the one I'm about to put out for you guys is a bit more downbeat, but I wanted to include it because it kind of leans into our point about StAnza, because this particular poem is one of mine, and I won an award for it in 2015, which was StAnza's Poem of the Fringe, which was a big deal for me to win a sort of award. I was very new in the scene, and yeah, it was really cool to win it, and it was particularly wonderful to win it for this poem, which is one that means a lot to me. Those that have followed I Am Loud Poets, or myself for some time will know that I lost my mum during our first Fringe run, and during our second Fringe run I performed this poem. It is called Evelyn, and I hope you enjoy it.
26 years old, and I finally felt the weight of you. And while you were always small, I knew my strength alone wouldn't be enough to carry you. So I stood 3 by 2, and I led with my left. Right behind my uncle I left behind all the crosswords said, and right after I laid you down to rest, I left breath on your brand new pinewood chest. Hardest day of your life, they say. Like it'll go away. Like tomorrow isn't just another hurdle for you to climb. Like time hasn't unfurled itself right in front of your eyes and left a war zone in your way. Walls and barbed wire chains made out of birthday parties and Christmas holidays. No choice but to wade through the mud of past joys that you will forget to not remember. See, I don't write anymore. Instead, I stab and tear at the pages I chose to scribble my life upon. And when ink dries, the only words that reach bloodshot eyes are the lyrics to your song. And the intro starts in my chest with the drum beats, notes claw up my throat and crash into clenched teeth that ends in a scream. See, poets paint with colors of emotion, but how can I create art when you have left me only one, and it is storm cloud grey? Until just like ships that sail stormy seas, I see nothing but uncertainty in front of me. Mothers paint with colors of flesh and bone. They use blood like thread to stitch love into children's souls. They are sculptors, and they carve with care and precision. The only problem with making art is you can die before you finish. I am unfinished. Not half the man that I could be if you were still here to oversee how I rise to the challenges life throws at me. I am unfinished. Like every poem I write, wholeheartedly started only to be quickly discarded when I realize I have nothing left to say. I am unfinished. We are both too far away to keep carving. This is the first of the poems you will never hear. And I fear, like me, they will remain.
And that was me with my poem Evelyn, which is still an incredibly important piece to me. And like I said, I was very pleased to win an award for it. It was a very strange year at the Fringe. There have been many strange years at the Fringe. This one being the strangest because we're not there. But to chat about spoken word, to chat about maybe some Fringe stuff, maybe some StAnza stuff, all that kind of good stuff. Said stuff too many times. We are going to be chatting to an amazing special guest. I'm so happy to have her on the Loudcast, that she would agree to come and chat to me for an hour. It is the director of StAnza, an incredible poet, an incredible person. It is Eleanor Livingston. How are you doing, Eleanor?
Hi, Kev. Yeah, not so bad. Yourself?
Good. That's about the best we can expect in these times, I think. Every one of these I've done the how's it going, and there has usually been followed by a long silence or a sigh, or it's a bit tense. Are you surviving COVID?
I'm getting a bit stir crazy now. That's the thing. I'm this weird mixture of desperate for normality and crowds and so on, and terrified about the idea as well. So we've been more or less sort of semi-shielding ourselves, staying at home. We're lucky to have a garden. Walks on the beach early morning or in the evening when it's quiet, and not much else.
I get what you're saying about almost nervous to go back. It was weird what you forget. I was as soon as sort of restrictions were lessened a little bit and you could bubble with another house or whatever, I went to visit my dad, and I was just spending one night there, and I had no idea how to pack for it, like just to do an overnight bag. I was like, what do I need to leave the house? It was not fun.
The things that used to be a nuisance now are, packing for going away. The excitement. Yeah.
Exactly. But you as well are in a similar spot of, like, I was talking there about how we kind of are missing out on Fringe this year, and obviously Fringe is such a huge part of what we do at Loud Poets, but this would be the kind of time of year that you're prepping for StAnza, and I know you're still doing a lot of work on it, but it must be a very different experience this year, right?
It's been a completely different summer. Normally immediately after StAnza I kind of collapse for several weeks and recover, and then I start travelling. So I would, in normal circumstances, have been going in May down to the Newcastle Poetry Festival, and then over to Bremen for theirs, and then to Berlin, and then to Rotterdam, and then back in time for all the Edinburgh festivals. So all of that.
It's a hard life, that festival director gig, isn't it?
It's the best bit. I always say we're very lucky in the timing, because although a lot of people say, why do you want to have your festival in early March, there are there are logistic and funding reasons why we have to have it then, but the real upside is that all the really hard work is done over the winter, and then in the summer, when everybody else is busy with their festivals, we're fairly relaxed and can tour around and sort of talent scout but this year I've been working harder than ever because we've done a lot of work online, trying to find work for poets and also to offer poetry as a sort of consolation and distraction for people stuck at home. So I've never had
I mean,
such a busy summer.
it was a thing I was definitely going to bring up, actually, is I think people often forget that, when they think about a festival or, a kind of event series, like even like the book festival or things like that, they think about the festival itself in that period of time, and they sometimes overlook what these organizations do throughout the year to support their sector and to support the people working in it. And I know StAnza has done stuff, every year throughout the year, but I know personally that you guys did a lot during lockdown and stuff to try and continue to support poets. So yeah, we will definitely get chatting about that. But I do, just before we get stuck into StAnza, I did just want to talk about at least one of the poems that we had at the start of the show, and it's to level with you, Eleanor. My good friend, director of I Am Loud and the producer of the Loudcast, Mark Galley, when I informed him that it was his Pokemon Go poem that was to be chatted about on the Loudcast, and he realised you were the guest, he was less than enthused that someone that directs an international poetry festival was going to be chatting about his pun Pokemon poem. But I made the point to him that and kind of like you were saying about Fringe, is one of the things I really value about StAnza and your directorship of it, is that you guys have made a huge effort to include spoken word poetry, and especially the sort of weirder extremes of spoken word. And I know I see you at the Fringe every year, camped out in Banshee, seeing all the weird and wonderful spoken word that's going on. So I didn't think you'd mind chatting about a weird Pokemon poem.
Yeah, I don't mind. No, I've seen some pretty weird poetry. I think the weirdest was a sort of semi-strip with the including live baking of chocolate cake, while the poet stripped off. So that was probably the weirdest, in a basement in Edinburgh.
Wow.
But
was that Maria Ferguson's show?
It was a coffee shop down off Leith Walk.
Right.
And it was a trio, and it was all kind of food related. And they did different things, but the last one was the poet started sort of dressed like kind of Fanny Craddock or something, and baked a chocolate cake, and stripped off as she did it all the way. It was the most, and then offered us the cake at the end. And I always remember,
Wow.
funny thing was, I spoke to Stephen Sinclair at the Byre Theatre. I was telling him, and I said, I imagine you would probably have worries about the stripping. And he said, stripping? Nah, he said, but a microwave on the theatre? Health and safety nightmare. So we never did bring that one to StAnza.
I can only imagine the risk assessment that had to be filled out for that.
Yes.
So what did you think of Mark's Pokemon poem?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I mean, I have to own up and say that Pokemon and computer gaming is completely a closed door to me. I did last year, I think it was, or 2 years ago, when I was at the Newcastle Poetry Festival. I heard Stephen Sexton, who won the Forward first prize last year for a collection which was all Super Mario poems inspired. I think, as I recall, 70 poems, one each about the 70 levels of Super Mario. And that went completely over my head, but I went straight down from Newcastle to London to spend some time with my daughter and son-in-law. And my son-in-law, who works in IT, is very into gaming. And he immediately picked up all the references that I was able to remember from Stephen Sexton's Super Mario. So I know that definitely they engage with people, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who really enjoy it. I like lots of puns, but I think you do have to. You do have to have some idea of where it's coming from. But it was fun. It was fun.
It's funny. It's one of my. We do it regularly at our Loud Poets events. We do a kind of poetry jukebox where we throw a random prompt up on the screen, and poets just kind of have to jump forward and crowbar a poem in. But what's quite nice about it is when you watch the show back in video form, you get to see the reactions of the other poets behind them, and watching Jim Monahan try and understand what Mark was talking about while doing his Pokemon poem has got to be one of my highlights. He just looks so confused. But I think it's interesting because like you said, and I often think what you do as a live event promoter, if you're doing individual nights, is kind of like a microcosm of what maybe you're doing on a larger scale. And so I look at like that lineup that we had, and it's quite handy occasionally to be able to see the other poets in the video. Is you look, we've got Mark there doing his sort of Pokemon poem, but we also have Jim Monahan who does a lot of sort of like political working class poetry. He's from a sort of slightly older generation. And then we had Nina Valletta, who's a Canadian poet studying here, and she did a very sort of American spoken word style that's very stylized, very theatrical. And then you had Alicia Peer Mohammed, who is just won the Edwin Morgan Award and is a very celebrated literary poet. And so you try and get that mix, right, where sure, not everyone's cup of tea is going to be a Pokemon rant, but then not everyone's cup of tea is going to be very imagery laced, highbrow, literary poetry. So do you find that trying to get the balance is what you're after?
It's definitely not about just having the kind of poetry we like best and to suit us. What we're always trying to do is provide something for everyone. So there will always be things that split the audience and that some people love and some people really don't like. But I think that is what a festival does, or what the kind of mixed events you can get in that sort of setting. And people can go along and they might not like all of it, but if there's one thing they take away, then that can be something that really engages them. So it definitely is about also paying attention when you're watching poetry and watching poets, to see how the audience are reacting, not just how I'm reacting myself, but whether other people are engaging, to get an idea of how it works for a wider audience. And when I go overseas, often I'm listening to poetry that I don't understand in languages I don't understand. So it's about how the audience are reacting and how it sounds. It doesn't have to be something that I understand.
Absolutely. I totally get. I remember the first time I watched like the World Championship online live, and how staggered I was by how much I enjoyed certain poets who I had no idea what they were talking about. Just because the power of performance and you understand rhythm, you understand the idea of writing, even if you don't understand what those words are necessarily connecting together, you get the feel of someone, whether they're going to be enjoyable for an audience to watch.
I always when I quite early on, when I went to Berlin one year, and at Berlin they have simultaneous interpretation of the talking parts but not the poetry, which is the flip side of some other places, right. Because at Rotterdam they always provide translations projected, but you often don't understand what the introductions are and what the discussion is. But in Berlin you have headphones, and so because they're not translating the poetry, you're taking the headphones off and on because there's no point wearing them when you're just getting the poem in the original language. But what I discovered was if you hold the headphones in your hand, the vibrations are different when it's a poem as opposed to people just talking. That really made me so aware that poetry is different from just conversation. That even poets who maybe don't wouldn't say that they particularly wrote to rhythm, or that they're not so aware of that. I could feel it. I could actually feel in my hands that when it was a poem or when it was just people speaking.
That's fascinating to people, like, yeah, to actually just from the vibration of the speaker that's putting it out. That's really interesting. And obviously StAnza puts a lot of, it's in the title, right? StAnza, Scotland's International Poetry Festival. It's there is such an emphasis on bringing in people from around the world. I know when I've been there in previous years, seeing the sort of scope of who you manage to bring in is very inspiring. It's incredible to see. Is that something that you guys put a lot of emphasis on, trying to represent different language and stuff within the festival?
Yes, it has been right from the beginning. Even before my time, there were always translated poets at StAnza. But for me, I had a kind of a sort of revelation about it was back in 2006, and I was invited for the first time to an overseas festival, and I went to Rotterdam, and it just completely just blew my head, because unlike in the UK, even at StAnza, you'll normally have most of the poets are Anglophone poets. But if you go to European festivals, it's not, in Rotterdam, most of the poets are not speaking Dutch. In Berlin, most of the poets are not speaking German. It is just such this international buzz. And that mix of all these different languages and traditions, and speaking to all these people, I just thought, this is absolutely amazing. And I was very aware that I was lucky to be there, and that most people who come to StAnza are not going to have that opportunity. So I came back with the aim to try and to see how we could try and generate that same kind of vibe at StAnza and give people the chance to experience that.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly rewarding. Like I said, it really affected how I viewed poetry when I started, listening to poetry, in other languages that I didn't necessarily understand. And I find the process of translation very interesting. I know you work quite closely with Annie Rutherford in sort of your role in StAnza, and she is a poetry translator, and watching when I've seen her sort of perform alongside other poets and talk to her about how the process of translation works, that poetry is a very different, like you said, right? Poetry is different from a conversation. You cannot literally always translate a poem, because if there's wordplay or double meanings or specific rhymes and things like that, how do you just flip that into you can't run it through Google Translate? You know what I mean?
No.
It's sorry, you were saying?
I was going to say, I also realised from listening in to translation sessions in Rotterdam that year, how important the whole process of translation ought to be for all poets. I mean, I don't have sufficient fluency in any other language to translate myself, but just listening to the discussions that go on around translation makes you aware how important a process it is, because it's about looking at every single word and understanding what that word is doing in that line. And obviously translators are doing this with a view to translating it into a different language. But I think for poets, it makes you completely it gives you a completely different approach to how you write your own poetry, and how you read poetry, and understanding the importance of word choice and how language is used.
It's about that focus, I think. I think sometimes when you haven't spent a lot of time maybe looking at other languages to get that sort of richer understanding of language, you don't have the same focus and attention to detail on specific words. I always think if I could go back and change one thing about my time at school, of which there would be many things to change, the main one would be I would have paid more attention in French. I've done, as time's gone on, I've done sort of international European exchanges and things like that. I remember vividly being in Azerbaijan with a group from sort of 7 different countries, from Ukraine to Portugal, Holland, Azerbaijan itself, like Bulgaria, this sort of really international collective, and everyone there could speak English, their own language, and most of them could speak a third language like they could communicate in, and the whole festival had to be held in English because none of the Scottish people could speak anything else. And you go, there's such an emphasis lacking here to really... A good example is I can barely get by with the language I have. I pointed out earlier in this episode of the Loudcast, the only reason I know out with is an exclusively Scottish word is because an American told me. So I'm not doing too great as it goes.
No, I mean, I think out with is one of these words we really need to keep hold of.
It's a good word. It's a good. Everyone I've seen see that poem is always then. It's like whenever that word comes up on Twitter, Katie gets tagged, which is good fun.
It's, you
but
soon find
obviously,
out if you use it. Your thesaurus and your computer will try and change it for you. You keep having to say yes, this is a word. Yes, this is a word.
Yeah, the pains of being Scottish. You have to reprogram your spell check.
But it obviously it works for us that places like Azerbaijan do make, they use English enough that we can still enjoy it, which is a huge privilege that we have in the Anglophone world. That so often that is the case. We're getting the benefit of the facility that just about everybody else in the world has with language that we don't. So we are very lucky.
I think the thing that's very inspiring, both about you could look specifically at the use of language that StAnza's had, and I know there's been years where you have specifically themed that one of the themes of the festival will be another country, and so you'll be leaning into that language and things like that. But StAnza seems to do that a lot. How long has StAnza been running? Because you've been director since 2010, right?
The first StAnza festival was held in 1998.
Wow.
So I have actually been at every StAnza festival except the second one, because
wow.
I don't think I even realised it was a festival, but a friend of mine said, there's something up in St Andrews this weekend, and we went to an event in Aikman's Bar on the Sunday afternoon. So so I didn't go the following year, and I've been every year since, but I only became involved with the organisation in 2003, and I was asked to join the planning committee, and then a couple of years later I took over as artistic director for 5 years, and then in 2010 I took over as festival director. So so it's been a long time.
Because obviously I bring it up just because anyone in a position within an organization, and organizations themselves, when you have a successful festival that's going well, I guess there's sometimes the option to not innovate as much, to not push the creativity as much, because the formula worked, let's continue to do the thing. Whereas I know, especially in recent years, well, I say recent, I mean the last 5-6 years, there's been a much bigger push to be more inclusive of spoken word poetry, with the poetry sort of salons in the afternoon, the sort of poem in a pie kind of thing. Has that been has that been hard to do as a kind of entrenched festival?
I think it goes back longer than that. I mean, I don't think I can take credit for that, because we had our first slam, I think, in 2007 or 2008, and Robin Cairns won. So that was the first, and we've had a slam every year since then. And I think we started the uh, the lunchtime poetry cafe. It was originally, I think, called Pies and Pints, and then we changed it. But that was about 2008.
Wow, right, yeah.
So yeah, but what I would say is what we've probably changed is we've had a lot more spoken word as part of other performances at the festival, as well as these two kind of dedicated strands. So that's probably been a newer development.
And how have you found that? Because obviously, from what I know, I might be way off, but from what I've kind of read, and we've known each other a while, from what I've kind of maybe gleaned, is you come from a more literary background, and I get the impression that StAnza, in St Andrews and Poetry Festival and all that, I imagine that a big chunk of the audience and the regular festival goers are more of a literary poetry, page poetry kind of crowd. How have you found bringing in more spoken word and kind of integrating those together?
I don't know that I don't think a lot of other people would describe me as terribly literary. um,
It shows how lowbrow I am, Eleanor.
I studied English at university, but not in any very advanced way. And it was decades later before I started writing myself. I was actually just saying to somebody the other day that there probably were people writing poetry when I was at St Andrews, but I didn't know them. I wasn't in a poetry crowd, though, to be honest, I don't think I would give up my time at St Andrews as a student because I had a ball. But I wasn't in a literary crowd then. But I always was a poetry reader. But I don't know that I did make a huge distinction in between sort of more literary poetry and more performance poetry, because from quite early on I was aware of both and experiencing both. And one of the joys about going to overseas festivals and encountering people there is you have absolutely no, I mean, often you don't know anything about them. You only, you meet them and you say, where do you come from, and then you hear them perform. And often I wouldn't realise whether they were meant in their own countries, they were known as performance poets, stand-up poets, or whether they were known as page poets. So I think I just reacted to them as poets that I enjoyed them. I'm thinking, for example, like Maud van Houwert from Belgium, and I encountered her at a festival overseas when she was reading behind a podium. But her work is much more performance. But I just really enjoyed it, so I wasn't kind of making these distinctions. So
it's funny.
yeah.
I think that is an important thing to take into consideration. Is like that you don't necessarily need to. I mean, there are some people who are very obviously, performance poets. Like, I think of, even if you look back, guys like Cooper Clarke and Roger McGuff and things like that, Selena Godden, people that have been, pioneering performance poets for a long time. And then there are people who would very much consider themselves not performers. But what I think StAnza does really well, and I know the years I've been there, is especially the headline acts. And what you see is people who do, get ahead and become, those headline acts that you would book. And I know previous years when I've been there, seeing people like Don Patterson or Jackie Kay or Robert Crawford, folk like that while they may be, considered page poets and write, for the page, they all know how to read their pieces. They all know how to engage an audience and how to, construct a poetry set and how to link their pieces together and, communicate effectively. So like, that to me is performance. I know one year at StAnza, I ran a workshop on, kind of performance skills, and some of it was so basic stuff like, this is how you adjust a microphone stand, this is how you hold yourself to get the best use of your diaphragm, this is how you sort of basic performance skills that people didn't have. And that's not going to change their style of poetry, but it's going to make them more effective at delivering that poetry when they are at a reading. And it's the same way that I would look at spoken word artists and suggest that they should experiment with form and structure and try and learn more about the poetic process rather than concentrating just on performance.
Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. I was just thinking when you mentioned Roger McGuff, because I had lots of Roger McGuff books before I was writing poetry. He was one of the poets that I had read, and I think long before I saw or heard him perform, so I hadn't sort of made this distinction in my head, what kind of poet is Roger McGuff. I just had these books which I really enjoyed, and I think you're right about when we have people at StAnza, we are looking for poets who are comfortable and engaging with an audience. I'm not saying 100% of the time we always get it absolutely right, but I think if there may be some excellent poets who write brilliant poetry but are really not comfortable delivering it themselves, and I don't think putting them on a stage and making them read to an audience is doing them or their poetry or the audience any favours. So that's why I travel so much, because I don't just want to read what poetry people are writing. I want to, if I possibly can, see how they are on the stage and see how they engage with an audience. And sometimes we started the round table readings, and we started them in 2008, and ironically kind of inspired by two poets who are both themselves brilliant on the stage. It was things that were said by August Kleinsaler, the American poet, and Tony Curtis, the Irish poet, both along the lines of, it doesn't matter if it's a small, tiny audience, as long as they're really engaged, that's what makes a good event. And I thought 100%. Well, we could work with that, because what August had said was, you turn up to do a reading on a wet Wednesday afternoon in February at a university, and there's only a dozen people there, but they're all there because they're really keen, so it makes for a great event. Yeah. And I thought, well, we don't need to wait for the weather to be bad. So we started our round table readings, which are definitely, they are expensive for us to offer, with a maximum audience of 12. But that does enable us to give a different type of experience. Now, quite often the poets who we were asked to do them are poets like August, who did one when he came to StAnza that year, who are wonderful on the main stage. But it does offer a different type of audience engagement for poets who are maybe not so comfortable on the big stage with a couple of hundred faces looking back at them, and similar.
I think it's so important to be able to suit the setting, the type of performance to the poet that's doing it. It's the same way when you're I talk about all the time, and we often do film work and things like that. You're like, this story, is this story a poem? Is it a film? Is it a TV show? Is it a sketch? Is it because a story will fit a certain form better. It's why some books don't work as film adaptations, because they don't fit the medium. And it can go for a performer as well. Some people don't fit that, buyer main stage with, the big auditorium. Some are much happier and their work is going to be better presented in a different space. And I think that leads me on to a kind of interesting question about, like, StAnza is obviously a festival and organization that is good at adapting to those sort of things. And so I wanted to kind of broach with you a little bit of what you guys are maybe looking to do for the upcoming festival in 2021. I know we've had some, sort of discussions. If people don't know, I recently did a little bit of work for StAnza that I was very happy to do, talking about supporting poets. I did a video of kind of like how to film yourself, because I think you guys are expecting to have to maybe lean to more online content.
Yep, absolutely. Our plans are for a hybrid festival in March. A lot of it will be online, with a kind of mix, because if it's possible to have any kind of small socially distanced live audiences, then we might have the live audiences but watching live streamed poetry from a poet who's elsewhere, because we're not expecting to be able to have international travel and so on, and more outdoors as well. We're just going to be expecting people to put on a big jacket, put on a scarf, put on your hat, put on your gloves, bring your umbrella, be prepared, and try and brave the weather, but at the same time expecting that we'll have to have everything completely adaptable, so that if it turns out that we have to have it all virtual and online, then it will be, so that the festival will still be able to go ahead, regardless of what's happening at that point about restrictions and lockdown and COVID and so on. So that's the plan.
I often think it's a bit of a double-edged sword that we've kind of been dealt, here where you go, it's obviously a huge level of work to adapt to the situation we find ourselves in, and people having to try new things and push themselves to experiment, and that can often be difficult and scary. But I often think there's a benefit to it in terms of, if you're pushing online, it means people that can't necessarily make it to St Andrews can access the festival in more of a way than they would normally. I know you guys work throughout the year, and even while the festival's on, you try and include people who can't make it, but this would be a much more
I think, yeah,
clear way to do that.
What I'm hoping is that the whole funding structure will understand the need to support online work as much as they always did support live work, because we always have at least our StAnza's we've had quite a lot of experience of virtual and digital events, going all the way back to 2009, which really was the kind of, it was the very early days. It was scary stuff, and it began because we'd arranged an event which involved it was part of the homecoming year. So we had 3 people who had been together, students at St Andrews. One of them was the actor-director Crispin Bonham Carter, and Clark Morgan is now a theatre director in America, and Crallan Kaler is a poet who's in Amsterdam. And the 3 of them were coming to put on a kind of verse drama, a sort of semi-autobiographical verse drama of their time at St Andrews. And all was going well. Then we started getting these slightly worrying emails from Crallan, whose partner was expecting their second baby imminently, and it didn't arrive. And so Crispin and Clark arrived and said, "Is Crallan here?" And we said no, and it turned out the baby still hadn't arrived, so he couldn't come. So Stephen Sinclair at the Bar said, "It's okay, we can use Skype," and Skype was really quite experimental in those days. So Crispin and Clark rejigged the script, and Crallan was represented by a mop with a coffee cup at the end most of the time, but also appeared by Skype, and we didn't warn the audience. And in those days, so it was really quite a dramatic moment, because there was a big screen at the back of the stage, but I don't think anybody paid attention. And then just suddenly, when Clark and Crispin were wandering about saying, "Where is Kralin?" and then he appears on the screen. So that was amazing. And when we were tidying up the next day, I said, we don't really just need to wait for a crisis to use this technology. We should do it again. And we got so excited, we thought, if we don't do it now, somebody will beat us to it. So we organised what I think was for the world first. I don't know if anything similar has been done again, but we organised the world's first international digital poetry festival, which took place in the November, and we had 12 cities from Mumbai in India to Sacramento, and live performances were arranged at each of these venues in front of audiences there, and it was all Skyped into the Byre in St Andrews and then live webcast. So that was quite unnerving and amazing. We only had audio from Mumbai and Stavanger, and Geneva we just kept seeing Geneva disappear, which apparently is because there was so much internet traffic around Geneva. And New York, we had to shrink New York to this tiny little pixelated square in the screen to keep the connection there. But that was quite something. So, and then after,
amazing.
And then we did another event with New York a year or two later, and we did a cyber slam with Melbourne, the Outload, which was Overload, the Melbourne Poetry Festival in those days, who challenged us. So yeah, we have used quite a lot of digital and virtual technology at the festival, and then we started live streaming several events each year. But the main reason that we have never done a lot more of that was because mostly up until now the funders have always been looking for you to be delivering events. They're wanting people there. It's how many people turn up, and so that had
which
to
is
be the focus.
I understand, but you think you need to realise that the potential reach of online activity is huge compared to, you have your capacity and that's it. If you're doing live performance, if you can couple that, and it's not a replacement for live performance at all. Live performance is something unique and special, and people should be encouraged to go and take part in that, but not everyone can. Capacities are limited, things like that, and you go, there should be more push to figure out how we can utilize both at the same time. Like, I know we Loud Poets, we always say come to the show, but then if you can't, or once you've been, you want to see bits of it again, we record our shows to be able to put more things out there. So I think it's good to try and do both. And like, I'm always encouraged by seeing StAnza's ability to adapt and be creative in how it engages with its audiences and stuff. So I am very, very excited to see what the festival looks like in 2021. Yes. If I can make it up, I'll definitely be there, but if not, then it would be lovely to be able to engage with it online and stuff. I will definitely be putting links in the description below to the StAnza website, where everyone that's watching can go and look up everything that's going on with StAnza. You guys have social medias and all that. I will throw in all the links so you can stay up to date. Eleanor, I know you're going to stick with us for a little bit, and we're going to have a chat on the Loudcast Extra. I want to chat about you to Bathgate, because we're both Bathgate proud, and some of your poetry and things like that. I apologise that we didn't get to chat about everything I wanted to, but this has been awesome. I find StAnza fascinating, and the work you do with it, really inspiring. But before we kind of wrap up the show and head off to the Loudcast Extra, I did want to check if you were up for maybe reading us a little poem, because like I said, you are I know what it's like. People often, forget, because you're a promoter and a booker and producer and all that, they end up forgetting that you're also a poet. So like it would be lovely to end this chat with, a poem from yourself.
Well, what I'll maybe read is it's a poem I haven't actually read very much, but I was looking through this book last night, and I thought this one actually, in that strange way that poems often do, years later you realise you explained something that you are now feeling. So I think this poem maybe catches what I said at the very beginning about how I'm feeling about life at the moment, in this kind of COVID stasis or coming out or whatever. So this is a poem called The Bridge. Remember the tree over the ravine in the Serpy woods where we used to play on rope swings, leapt from sloping shelves of rock, where we dared each other to walk across the mossy green length of that awkward bridge from childhood to our anxious older selves. How some of us got scared about halfway from there to here and swayed above the drop. And one girl slithered to a stop, astride the trunk, with boulders in the burn 10 feet below, thighs gripping tight, arms wrapped around. And as the rest of us looked on with scorn, she clung on there forever, unable to go back and unable to go on.
That's, beautiful stuff, Eleanor. That's, really nice. Is that, I don't know, obviously there's talking metaphorically, but when you were talking about the sort of crumbling rock and stuff, are you talking about the shale bings in West Lothian there?
Not in that one. That poem
No.
is sort of inspired by memories of my later childhood after we moved. We left Fife and we left Bathgate. We moved through to Fife. So that's a Fife one. But yeah, the shale bings appeared in some of my
It's just because I got
poems.
that. It's the immediate image I got. I guess I'm biased by the fact that I know we're both from Bathgate. But that's a really beautiful piece, and I absolutely get what you mean about you find new relevance in pieces that are about long past. That's a very interesting way to look at it. What a beautiful way to round off this episode of the Loudcast. Eleanor, thank you so much for joining me. It was lovely to catch up with
pleasure.
you.
Thanks.
Good. And best of luck for the festival in 2021. I know it'll be awesome, however you guys managed to put it together.
To all of us.
Like I said, I'm very excited.
in the live events world, I think we need it.
Go buy a poet's pamphlet. That's what the message from the end of this is. Guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been the Loudcast. If you want to see more from me and Eleanor, jump over our Patreon channel. You'll be able to see the Loudcast extra. Do all the liking and subscribing, all that jazz. Check out StAnza. Thank you so much, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Take it easy, guys. Eleanor, say goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, we'd appreciate it if you could hit the like button, if you could hit the subscribe button, and make sure to ring that bell icon so you don't miss any updates from us in the future. If you want to go that extra mile and support us a little further, we do have a Patreon channel with loads of exclusive goodies, and you can sign up for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate your help, guys, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.